New U.S. legislation aims to counter communist China. The bill will confront nearly all of Beijing's aggressive behavior. The White House says its upcoming renewable energy programs will create new U.S. jobs. But it seems the plan could make more jobs in China instead, and they could involve forced labor. The Philippines is invoking an old treaty with the U.S. It says an assault on Filipino territory is the same as an assault on U.S. territory. That's as South Korea boosts its cost of hosting U.S. troops there. All of the new actions target Beijing's aggression in the South China Sea. A report says an enraged homeowner killed a high-profile gang member in China. That's after authorities asked a group of thugs to forcibly tear down local houses. Now authorities are covering up the incident. And a heartbreaking story follows a 13-year-old girl as she fights for justice. Police and even her parents failed to help her after a violent kidnapping and assault. So she's turning to social media to get her message out. Hello and welcome to China in Focus. I'm Evelyn Lee, filling in for Tiffany today. The U.S. is introducing sweeping new legislation to counter communist China. The bill will confront nearly all of Beijing's controversial behavior. Nearly 300 pages, the bill will address China's abuse of the Uyghur ethnic minority, its crackdown on Hong Kong's democracy, its aggression toward Taiwan, and its assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region. On the Uyghur issue, new sanctions are possible. For Hong Kong, the bill will show further support for the city's democracy. Toward Taiwan, the legislation calls for an enhanced diplomatic partnership. And the Indo-Pacific region, the bill will focus on furthering U.S. military development there. In a news briefing on Friday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said China resolutely opposes the bill. But Taiwan's foreign ministry voiced the opposite. The spokeswoman expressed appreciation for the U.S. Senate's show of support. The draft measure is titled the Strategic Competition Act of 2021. It was introduced by leaders of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Menendez and Jim Risch. Menendez says he's confident the bill will be overwhelmingly approved by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee next week and the full Senate shortly thereafter. The committee will meet on April 14th to vote on the bill. The odds are looking slim for a U.S. snub of the Beijing Olympics. On Wednesday, the White House said there is no conversation of a boycott of the Games. The White House press secretary has noted that the U.S. position on a boycott has not changed. She told reporters that the administration has not discussed and are not discussing any joint boycott with allies and partners. The comment followed a warning from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Speaking about a potential boycott, the spokesman said that an attack on China would be met with a forceful response and opposition. Growing calls for a boycott of the Games come in light of China's poor human rights records. In the spotlight is Beijing's abuse against Uyghur Muslim minorities. Allegations say over 1 million Uyghurs have been forcibly detained in China's Xinjiang region. Abuses reportedly include torture, forced sterilization, political brainwashing, forced labor, and sometimes forced organ harvesting. The Biden administration claims that new good-paying jobs will be created through the renewable energy programs in their new infrastructure plan. However, it seems more jobs may be created in China instead, and it may involve forced labor in Xinjiang.
President Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan pushes for a green energy economy. Officials say it could create well-paid jobs, especially for displaced fossil fuel workers.
We want to make sure that we create good-paying jobs for all kinds of people in every pocket of America, and that means good-paying union jobs.
However, the president of the think tank Heartland Institute, James Taylor, says the move to a green economy would shift jobs from American conventional energy to foreign wind and solar power.
The rare earth minerals and other important minerals and metals that are necessary for wind turbines and solar panels, they are produced primarily outside the United States and primarily in China.
Rare earths and polysilicon are two raw materials needed for green energy technologies, and China dominates both markets. Moreover, nearly half of the world's polysilicon, which is crucial to producing solar cells, comes from Xinjiang, an area notorious for its forced labor camps.
Not just the materials, but the wind turbines and solar panels also are produced primarily outside the United States and primarily in China.
Recently, both Republicans and Democrat lawmakers have urged the solar industries to keep China, especially Xinjiang, out of their supply chain. However, Taylor says that might not be possible in the near future due to the high pollution levels of producing these materials and low labor costs in China. Biden's Environmental Protection Agency administrator also said recently that most of the parts the U.S. wants to install come from China.
To get Chinese ships out of its waters, the Philippines is invoking a 70-year-old treaty it has with the U.S. The treaty says an assault on Filipino territory is the same as an assault on U.S. territory. NTD's Don Ma has more.
The Philippines is again warning Beijing to tone down its aggression in the South China Sea. That's because China has still yet to remove ships it sent into the Filipino waters. In a fresh warning to expedite their departure, the Philippines is threatening a potential U.S. involvement in the standoff. The Philippines Defense Department says the country is keeping its options open. That includes leveraging partnerships with other nations, such as the United States. The department added that both parties are committed to undertaking their obligations under the Mutual Defense Treaty. The Mutual Defense Treaty is a 70-year-old pact between the Philippines and the United States. Under it, the U.S. is obligated to aid the Philippines in resisting threats or attacks. It also says that an assault on one party's territory is the same as assaulting on both the U.S. and Filipino territory. The Trump administration and the Biden administration have both affirmed that the pact applies to disputes in the South China Sea.
As we have stated before, an armed attack against the Philippines' armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft in the Pacific, including in the South China Sea, will trigger our obligations under the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty. When it comes to this,
in recent weeks, China has sailed over 250 ships into the Whitsun Reef area in the South China Sea. This despite a 2016 arbitral tribunal ruling that the reef is within the Philippines' territory. The Filipino side has said that it will protest every day until the Chinese vessels are removed. The U.S. says it stands behind the ruling and the Filipino side amid the dispute.
We have reiterated our strong support for the Philippines, and we have called on the PRC to abide by the 2016 Arbitral Tribunal award under the Law of the Sea Convention, which is final and legally binding on all parties.
The Philippines is a very important strategic ally. U.S. strategists see the country as a crucial link that could enable American forces to deter or win a conflict against Beijing. Don Ma, NTD News.
South Korea signed a defense cost-sharing agreement with the U.S. on Thursday. This amid rising tensions between Beijing and its neighbors in the region. In the agreement, South Korea promised to increase this year's cost of hosting U.S. troops in the country by about 14%. This is the biggest rise in nearly 2 decades. Right now, about 30,000 U.S. troops are stationed in South Korea. They're protecting the country from possible attacks from communist North Korea. South Korea's vice foreign minister and the U.S. Embassy's charge d'affaires signed the deal. Following the increase, South Korea will be paying $1 billion to host U.S. troops in 2021. The extent of the CCP's influence on operations here in the West may startle a lot of people, but not as many are aware that the infiltration actually started decades ago. NTD's Becky Zhou takes a closer look at what's been happening behind the scenes in Canada.
The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP's influence operations in America's next-door neighbor and ally Canada, reach into many aspects of society, including the media, the military, and the cultural sphere. First, we look at the media. According to a Canadian reporter, Chinese state-owned news agency Xinhua asked him to spy on people under the guise of news reporting. All intelligence he collected went to Beijing. Mark Burry used to work for Xinhua as its Ottawa correspondent a decade ago. He told the Epoch Times that the agency repeatedly asked him to collect intelligence. When then CCP leader Hu Jintao visited Canada in 2010, Xinhua asked Burry to find out who protested the visit and where those people stayed. Burry thought this was part of his news report, but it was never published. When the Dalai Lama visited Canada in 2012, Xinhua asked Burry to find out what the spiritual leader said to Canada's then Prime Minister in private. When Burry realized his reports weren't published, he confronted his boss. Xinhua's reply was that it always avoids publishing pieces that would embarrass the CCP, and that all his reports went straight to Beijing as intelligence. Refusing to spy on people, Burry quit after working for 2 years. The Canadian government website says Xinhua has an office in Ottawa. The agency was established in Canada almost 2 decades ago. Now we look at the military. The Chinese regime's military underwent winter training in Canada in 2018. The Canadian Prime Minister's spokesman admitted that Canada trained a Chinese military delegation in Ontario. Documents obtained by Rebel News show Canada conducted 18 military projects with Beijing in 2019. Canada's top military officer decided to cancel military exercises with Chinese troops in 2019. It was by request of the U.S. military. But the Canadian Foreign Affairs Department objected to the decision. They claimed that Beijing might see this as a retaliatory move related to the Meng Wanzhou case. In 2018, Canada arrested Chinese telecom giant Huawei's chief financial officer Wang Wanzhou upon U.S. request. Canada then canceled the training following the backlash.
This is one of the reasons why we actually stopped our training with the Chinese Mr. Speaker, and this is exactly what we're doing.
Now we turn to the cultural sphere. Many Beijing-controlled Confucius Institutes, or CIs, are still operating on Canadian campuses. A former teacher at a CI near Toronto explains what those institutes teach.
In fact, although the Confucius Institutes are outside China, they have strict requirements for our thoughts. It may sound old-fashioned. They do require that you follow the party line. That's how it is in the Confucius Institutes.
Zhao told the Epoch Times that CI instructors must teach what the CCP wants people to know, such as Tibet has been so-called liberated by the regime and that Taiwan is part of Communist China. They have to avoid topics such as the Tiananmen massacre in classrooms. These requirements went against Zhao's values, so she quit after teaching there for a year. Zhao then sued CI for its discriminatory hiring process. Before working at CI, Zhao had to sign a contract promising not to practice Falun Gong. Falun Gong is a meditation practice in the Buddhist tradition. It consists of moral teachings based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, and 5 exercises. Zhao kept her faith to herself due to the CCP's persecution of Falun Gong practitioners in China, but she resumed her spiritual journey after meeting up with some practitioners in Canada. Canada's McMaster University closed its CI in 2013 after its parent agency failed to remove its discriminatory requirements. A CCP agency affiliated with the United Front Work Department provides funding for CIs around the world. Becky Zhou, NTD News.
And coming up, an outraged Chinese resident reportedly kills a leading gang member. That's after local authorities asked the thugs to forcibly demolish nearby residents' homes. Now authorities seem to be covering up the incident. More on that after the break. The Chinese regime is again denying human rights abuses in the Xinjiang region following recent backlash. On Friday, CCP officials tried to discredit criticisms by airing propaganda videos for journalists at a press conference in Beijing. UN experts say at least 1 million Uyghurs have been detained in camps in Xinjiang. Witnesses say the communist regime tortured and sterilized Uyghurs and other dissidents. Last month, the US, the EU, the UK, and Canada imposed sanctions on Chinese officials over human rights abuses in Xinjiang. A man has gone missing in southern China. His son is appealing for help after local police harassed the man's wife. But his disappearance is only part of the story. His family has been persecuted by the Chinese Communist regime for 2 decades, all because they refused to give up their faith. NTD's Chang Chun has more.
Zhao Fenghui disappeared in southern China's Sanya city in Hainan province on Wednesday. He practices Falun Gong, a spiritual meditation system that has been brutally persecuted in China since 1999. The man's son, Zhao Shuai, explained his father had started heading home in the afternoon. But by that evening, he still hadn't arrived. No one could reach him. A family friend then called the police and confirmed that one person had been arrested and detained that day. But officers wouldn't release the person's name. Shuai suspected it was his father. That same evening, a group of police officers went to Shuai's parents' home. They ordered his mother to open the door, but didn't mention his father's whereabouts.
The police came to my parents' door and kept harassing us. My mother stayed quiet inside. She didn't dare to open the door because there were too many police officers. The camera on the door captured 6 people.
Shuai's father worked as a project supervisor for a major Chinese bank. He was expelled from his work unit and sent to work in a forced labor camp twice because of his belief. All 3 members of the family practice Falun Gong.
Since the persecution of Falun Gong started in 1999, my father has been petitioning authorities. He's been detained several times for a total of nearly 5 years. My father went on hunger strike 3 times, each time for more than 20 days. He went on a hunger strike, then was arrested, and then went on a hunger strike again.
Shuai's father was first arrested in 2000 for holding protesting banners in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. Authorities then transferred him to the detention center in his hometown in northeastern China. There, police instructed other inmates to beat him and tied his feet to a 3-foot-long stick. The stick was left on for a full week, even while eating and sleeping. Once it was removed, he could no longer walk. The man was later sent to a forced labor camp, an effort to force him to give up Falun Gong. The police beat him until he lost consciousness. He and other Falun Gong practitioners were also forced to watch videos slandering Falun Gong. That's in addition to performing forced labor. In 2002, Shuai's father was detained in a labor camp for the second time. He went on a hunger strike while there. Because of it, he went from over 200 pounds to just 90. By the time he was released, he couldn't even walk by himself. In light of the persecution, the family was forced to move to southern China in 2005. But the police continued chasing them from the northeast to the south. Last year, Shuai finally settled in Europe. According to U.S.-based Falun Gong news website Minhui.org, in the past year alone, over 100 Falun Gong practitioners have died because of the persecution. Shuai continues to appeal to the international community, asking the world to pay attention to what's happening to his family and rescue his father.
I just want them to release my father immediately and stop harassing my mother. At the same time, I also condemn this torture used by the Chinese Communist Party against us Falun Dafa practitioners.
Shuai's mother has since escaped and fled her home, but there's no information about Shuai's father's whereabouts. Changchun, NTD News.
When CCP officials asked some gang members to forcibly demolish homes in a Chinese village, an outraged resident reportedly killed the leading gang member. But local authorities are believed to be covering up the incident.
Local officials in a northern Chinese city is believed to have hired gang members to demolish residents' homes. A homeowner at the scene, however, drove a truck into the leading gang member and crushed him to death. Some Chinese netizens hailed the homeowner as a hero, saying a hero has reappeared. Local media covered the incident on Wednesday, but the report soon got blocked. An insider said online that the incident happened in late March. According to local residents, a group of people came to their village to demolish houses. They were dressed in uniforms and armed with riot gear. The group was reportedly led by a gang member called Yang Jinzhou. When Yang got to local resident Mr. Xie's home, he did not find Xie there. Yang reportedly beat Xie's 70-year-old parents. Other villagers went to find Xie and he hurried home. Yang then reportedly cursed at Xie. Xie was then agitated and drove a heavy truck into Yang and knocked him to death. Later, local officials reportedly tried to cover up the forced demolition and treated the incident as a traffic accident. Xie is currently held in the local detention center.
And now we turn to news of a 13-year-old girl and how she's being forced to seek justice for herself through social media. That's after authorities and even her family failed to help her. A victim of kidnapping and rape, authorities have refused to step in. When she went to the police, they brushed her off, claiming nearby surveillance tools were broken. The lack of help pushed her to share her story online. The young girl's name is Anne. Attached to her post is a video fully exposing her face. She's also holding a signboard with her name, ID, home address, and phone number written on it. Anne explained that after she was attacked, thugs sent by the rapist showed up at her home. They threatened the lives of her and her family, warning them not to go to the police. To back up the threat, they claimed to have connections with the police. They also offered the girl's parents money to settle the situation, but Anne refused. She explained that her parents became angry out of fear and beat her a number of times to get her to accept the offer. She ended her video by saying, "I beg you to share this and help me." In a later post, Anne said police tried to arrest her on Friday in the name of an investigation. But she suspects the police just wanted to control and silence her. As the influence of Anne's post continues to grow, her town's local police published announcements about the case on Thursday. They urged people not to circulate Anne's video. They likened stopping the video's reach to holding hands in order to protect the healthy growth of children. The next day, a second notice was released, saying the victim had been properly settled and care measures have been implemented. Yet another incident that same day suggests otherwise. A fan of a Chinese internet celebrity who saw Anne's video went to Anne's village to investigate. But when they arrived, the fan was surrounded and attacked by 4 men and 2 women at the entrance of the village. The attackers grabbed the person's smartphones, deleted photos of the incident, and drove the person out of the village. The fan later started receiving harassment phone calls. Taiwan's foreign minister is accusing Beijing of using its vaccine diplomacy to flex its muscles. The comment came on Wednesday as Taiwan allies step up counter-pressure on China. The Chinese regime has made its intentions clear to South American countries, saying Beijing will offer them vaccine supplies as long as they break off diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Beijing's pressure is particularly heavy on Central South America, where Taiwan has 5 allies. According to Taiwan's Foreign Minister Joseph Wu, the Chinese regime actively promotes itself in Paraguay, promising the country millions of doses under condition that it departs from Taiwan relations. The situation has heaped pressure on Taiwan, which established diplomatic ties with Paraguay back in 1957. Wu says countries that accept Chinese vaccines all exert influence over Taiwan's diplomatic allies. Taiwan has since been actively building connections with like-minded countries, including Japan, the US, and India. India has already sent 100,000 vaccine doses to Paraguay, and another 100,000 doses are on the way. Wu added that currently India's help is the most important. While U.S. goodwill can help relieve China's pressure on many countries, Beijing denies using vaccine diplomacy tactics in its dealings with Paraguay. The Italian Prime Minister is revealing that his government blocked a Chinese takeover of an Italian semiconductor manufacturer. He says the Italian government could potentially block more such takeovers. Bloomberg reports that the Italian company is LPE Designs. It makes a product that treats silicon and readies it for chip manufacturing. The Prime Minister says it was common sense to prevent the semiconductor takeover, seeing how a chip shortage has slowed auto production. Italy's Golden Powers rule allows its leaders to protect strategic businesses. Italy's Economic Development Minister wants Italy's steel and automotive sectors to fall under the same protections. The pandemic and the resulting economic losses have left some companies vulnerable to takeovers. The EU as a whole has beefed up protections for those companies. Twitter is launching a new emoji to celebrate the first anniversary of Asia's pro-democracy movement, Milk Tea Alliance. The movement's name comes from a popular drink in the region, milk tea. The online alliance first started last April as a Twitter meme. By now, it has grown into a global movement led by human rights activists in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Thailand. Twitter says over 11 million tweets over the past year featured the Milk Tea Alliance hashtag. The alliance criticizes the Chinese regime's aggressions in the South China Sea, among other issues. Twitter is banned in China, but not in Hong Kong. Last year, Hong Kong's pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong posted on Twitter saying, "Hong Kong stands with our freedom-loving friends in Thailand against Chinese bullying." Twitter is asking people around the world to join the conversation to show support for the movement. And that is it for today's China in Focus. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Evelyn Lee.